Well, we can go ahead and get started. I'll keep an eye on the waiting room as folks join us. But I am Jordan Todd. He, him, his are my pronouns, the coordinator for Student Learning Initiatives in Office of Residence Life. And so happy to have you all here with us. And my co-facilitator, I'll let her introduce herself.
Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us this evening. I'm Kara Ong Whaley. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm Associate Director at JMU Civic.
So we are, this is designed to give you all some tips and strategies to engage in difficult election conversations, both before the election and also after, depending. And I think we all know that we might not know the results for several days after the election as well. And so we want to make sure that you all have the resources and skills needed in order to best support residents, as well as support yourselves as well. But before we dive into tonight, I just want to get a sense of where you all are. What are you feeling about the election right now? What sort of anxieties do you have? What concerns do you have responding and supporting residents within your role as an RA? You can feel free to use the chat or unmute. Yeah, I think that's a really good point of, we're worried about the contentious atmosphere, how it may affect resident relations. Yeah, I think that's definitely a very valid concern. I think a lot of concerns that staff members have, I have as well, and this idea of not knowing what that will look like. Anyone else have any concerns that they want to share? Yeah, interested in seeing how everything will play out while remaining positive despite uncertainty. Yeah, I think it is. Where are we going to find that balance between being hopeful, being optimistic, while also not knowing the results? Yeah. Well, I think thanks for sharing. I think also you get those concerns in the back of your mind as well. There's been plenty of time throughout this dialogue to share, ask questions, and gain different perspectives as well. One thing that I want to say is that this election is different, and I think if you talk to folks on both sides of the election, they will also say that as well. What is on the ballot is different than what has been on the ballot in years past. I think this is not a normal year. I mean, obviously with the pandemic and also this election season as well. And I think because this is a different election, it makes our lives a bit more difficult, and it certainly makes your role as RAs more difficult as well. I think one of the biggest challenges that you all have is balancing your role as being a full person, as being a full student, and your role as needing to support our residents, and knowing that some of your residents might disagree with you politically as well. And we know that that is a really tough balance always. But I know it's going to be specifically, particularly difficult here, trying to balance and seek support for yourself as we also manage and contend with whatever aftermath that may be here on campus on November 4th. Kara, did you want to add anything?
If it's okay, I would love to just share a couple of points that we've also been emphasizing. So first, this has been an extremely divisive election, and there's a lot of attention, of course, at the top of the ticket and the presidential election, and that tends to be when we see more engagement and involvement. But there is also, there are also elections down ballot from city council, school board, Congress, and then up to the Senate as well. And so, I think that is something that we should also be thinking about, that this isn't that this is going to affect people at different levels, and some of the more important elections it can even be at the local level, because it will affect people's daily interactions, or affect people's daily lives, where policy is made at the local level. But we do know that, at the top of the ticket, it does matter in particular for traditionally marginalized and minoritized groups. And so that is something that's really important to consider, is how different people with different social identities may be affected by who and what is on the ballot this year. And I want to include in that Amendment 1 too. There is a constitutional amendment that's being voted on about redistricting, and there's been a lot of discussion around that, and how the impacts that will have because it would amend the Virginia Constitution. I want to also emphasize that we are saying that we believe in a safe and peaceful transition of power if one is required by the election outcome, and that is something that is central to democratic societies. And just to emphasize that this is, it's not a normal year if we have to emphasize that. And reinforce some of the democratic norms and principles. But that is something that we are standing firm on. Also, just, when we think about JMU, we want to make sure that we emphasize inclusivity, while recognizing that not everyone has had traditionally equitable access, voice, and participation in discussions and decision making, and especially in our political process. We're also emphasizing that no one's existence should ever be questioned, and we've seen that coming from some candidates. So we are emphasizing how we believe in the dignity of every human being, and believe that everyone should thrive, and that is just not up for debate. We also want to emphasize that politicians don't always live up to our democratic ideals. And finally, we never know the election results on election day. What we see in the media has always been just a projection. Election administration is facilitated by localities, by local election boards, and by state departments of elections. There are more than 260 legal challenges this year across the country because of the pandemic, but all of these challenges are related to who can vote, how they can vote, and when they can vote. And so there's going to be a lot of things that are going to continue to play out. And the Supreme Court even just weighed in this week, and we could potentially see the Supreme Court weighing in on the election after Election Day. So depending on how things play out with the Electoral College, we may not have any certainty on November 4th moving forward. But we want the results to be accurate. And so I think, we want to emphasize, that there could be uncertainty, and that's okay. We'd rather have an accurate result rather than a quick one. But at the same time, we want to be willing to question, particularly election officials. And I do want to state, in the state of Virginia, we're already the Department of Elections has already been, and the localities have already been processing early voting and absentee voting. They have processed 70% of those early votes already. But other states, particularly states that are key to the Electoral College, like Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, their state laws do not allow for the processing of those early ballots until after Election Day. And so that's why we could also see some additional uncertainty. And, in addition to questions about, across many states about, can absentee ballots be received X amount of days past the election, and things like that. So a lot there is uncertainty, and so I think that is where students may need help in kind of understanding some of these election processes.
And so I think one of the things, and I think one of the important things too, is that you might be in the position to have and facilitate a conversation with our residents. And I think one of the most important tips is establishing ground rules for that a conversation, much like we would establish ground rules for a social justice or diversity conversation as well. And so making sure that you're establishing a brave space where folks are willing to share who they are, but recognizing that safety cannot be guaranteed in any space as well. But a brave space empowers marginalized folks to have ownership and share their experiences, but it also allows us and allows everyone to hold each other accountable for the words that they are saying, and particularly the impact that those words may have as well. I think one of the things that has been helpful for me in this election season in particular is seeing every election conversation as a social justice conversation, and using a lot of those same dialogue and facilitation skills that I would use in order to help students dialogue across difference. And I think the reason why I use those skills a lot is because in this election in particular, we have seen a lot of alignments between social identities and party affiliation, which means that we can on average the Republican Party, for instance, their base is mainly white men, and the Democratic base is more diverse, and we've seen that shift happen over the past 4 to 8 years. And so I think that's why I think this election feels more personal for all of us, is because we see ourselves affected directly in the candidates and in the policies as well. So an effective way to reflect and have dialogue about those connections is using the tool, the political identity, which is in the link that Kara had put in the chat. I think it's a great tool to use to help folks understand and think about what were some of the people, places, and events that might have shaped their political identity and behaviors, and how those people, places, and events correspond and align with particular social identities as well. So when we think for example there, I mean, we know that school shootings have been on the rise throughout the past 10 to 10 years, and a lot of those students now are now eligible to vote for the first time. And so we can probably surmise that the active shooter drills and school shootings are have been really influential in how they have framed and developed their political identity. But we also know that for students who may have grown up in a more rural background, and their experience with guns and firearms could be very, very different. And knowing and because their experiences are very, very different, that influences their not only their social identities but also their political behavior as well. And so there you see just one example of how the issue of guns can result in two different orientations around not only a political identity or different influences on how as one social identities may or may not play a role in the advocacy process. And so I think for me, I think that's been a really helpful tool because again, we are all political beings. All of our actions are political. And I think voting and non-voting are both political actions in themselves. And so I think a really good tool to think about and use if you come across a contentious conversation between two residents is really thinking about, how does this issue impact you? What draws you to this issue? Why is this important for you, as a way to tease out the possible impacts that it might have on not only on the individual, but for other people as well. Kara, is there anything you would like to add there?
The only thing is I did post in the chat a link, and maybe we can include this link in the video that will be posted. But Pew Research Center just has new data out about what the electorate looks like, which can just be a source if you're thinking about these questions about how the parties are sorted, how the electorate is sorted, particularly by different social identities. By race, ethnicity, age, education, and religion, especially. And then just to maybe add on to Jordan's point a little bit about this question of about voting and voting behavior. We know right now this year is on track for having high turnout, but we don't know exactly what that's going to look like on campus. We do know in 2016 that just over 50% turned out to vote. So that means about half of campus didn't turn out to vote. So, we've seen a lot of enthusiasm, and we know that many students have already voted early, but there are going to be students, who haven't voted. And I think being willing to engage in some of those conversations and helping students to recognize their impact, either by participating in the process or not participating in the process, not only for themselves and having themselves represented, but even more so and especially so for others around them, and thinking about how their actions impact those around them, as Jordan said.
At this point, go ahead, Kara.
Oh, I was just also going to say another helpful, a couple other sets of questions, and these are in the facilitating discussions guide, and also in the political identity PowerPoint activity, but really trying to, in our conversations, trying to get at the why questions, um, uh, why folks have come to the positions that they have, and why they engage in politics or not. I think can be really helpful too for just kind of digging a little bit deeper for their own self-reflection, but also for understanding um, where their peers, what has affected their peers, and where they're coming from as well.
So at this point, I'm curious if there are any questions that you all have about how to engage in these conversations, or any particular concerns, either about the resources and context that we have shared, or any specific questions that you all may have about the uh, election in our role with supporting residents.
If it's okay while we're waiting for some questions, I did also want to share, and I meant to do this sooner, I apologize. There is a range of post-election programming that we can also point students to. And I will post a link in the chat for you all. But just to highlight a few of those resources, the day after the election, and then also on November 5th, Thrive, the Honors College, and CMIS have partnered with a nonprofit mental health organization based in Stanton called the Arrow Project. And they're going to provide a space for students to discuss and process the outcome of the election and how it's affecting them, and engage students in a facilitated dialogue. There will also be expert takes on the election, just what we know so far from the College of Arts and Letters on Facebook Live on the 4th. And then later that afternoon, there will be a panel with psychology faculty and with counseling faculty to also process our emotions, excuse me, and foster discussion around what kind of drives our election emotions and what we can do to cope. SOGI is also having programming the day after the election, providing space, especially for the LGBTQ plus students, to process election results and have resources on self-care. And then throughout the next couple of weeks, there are other conversations about self-care, managing stress, coming together on campus to explore concerns and the humanity behind others' political views. So I will drop the link to all of this programming that's happening across campus. And then also the Counseling Center has put out some guides that are on the links that I've already shared, but I'll just highlight that as well for you all to potentially use as a resource for your residents as well.
Well, it's okay if there aren't any questions at this point. I know that some of the things that have been brought up, at least in conversations that I've been in with both RAs and hall directors, a lot have to do with your role in mediating conversations and knowing that our traditional approach is to remain neutral in both parties, and being able, in your role, being able to facilitate a fair and equitable conversation. We also know that neutrality in some of the conversations that may be happening both before and after the election might not be the best approach. Because oftentimes, if it's a conversation around conflict, or facilitating a conversation that's contentious, requires both parties to be willing to listen to the other person's a perspective. And so my advice, and I think some things that I've shared with other folks, is that if someone's immediate safety has become threatened, that you have an obligation to remove that person from the situation as well. And another thing that we talked about is want to be very, very clear, is that our job is to not tell folks who to vote for. I think that is obviously a person's vote is their a personal choice. Our role is facilitating conversation and dialogue about the impacts that those choices may have on themselves and the community as a whole, much like we would facilitate a conversation around the impacts and consequences of one's behavior around vandalism or alcohol and drug use as well. We want to continue to have a community focus in these conversations, focusing the reflection on why someone made a particular choice and the impact of that particular choice and the influences on that particular choice, rather than the choice itself. I think is very clear and very important that we don't tell folks to vote a certain way, or chastise folks who may not have voted either. I think our role, like I said, is to make sure that we're having conversations and dialogue around the influences to a particular choices, no matter what those choices may be in this context. Are there any questions, concerns, comments? Want to give folks enough time in the chat if they are using the chat function. Okay, is there anything you want to add?
Thank you so much for organizing this, Jordan, and for all of your expertise in developing this. And please, if you all have any questions, I'm here as well, and happy to help as I can. And if students have questions about the election or need any additional resources, they can reach me at civic@jmu.edu.
Great, and if any of you all have any questions or concerns as well, you can feel free to email me as well. I'd be more than happy to set up an individual meeting if you have any specific concerns that you want to talk through as well. I think that the biggest thing that I'll leave you all with is that you have folks behind you. Your hall director, your area director, all the folks in residence life will be more than happy to support you in whatever conversations or conflicts that may arise. And so know that you always have a breadth of resources and support behind you as well. But thanks so much for joining us, and we will have this posted tomorrow morning on our YouTube channel, and I'll be sure to send out an email once that has been posted. Thanks so much, everyone.